Hello there and welcome Virtual Space Hero community. I hope that you are as excited as I am. The last weeks we have been talking a lot about virtual teams and virtual trainings again, and today we are diving deep into a topic that is very topical because we're talking about hybrid teams. So many of you, pre and post COVID, have been working maybe a little bit virtually, a little bit in the office as well. But currently, we are really we are facing the challenges in our organization on how to deal with this quest for a hybrid environment. And I'm happy because many of my clients have been working with me together on the topic of hybrid organizations, hybrid leadership and teams for more than 2 years, but many are new to this topic. And also for me, it is a tremendous pleasure because there are a few experts out there that I love following when it comes to virtual teams, virtual team meetings, or virtual organizations. But she's not only a virtual team expert, but she's also an expert for hybrid teams. And I know that those of you who were with me in the LinkedIn Live about virtual teams know her already and are as excited as I am. It is Nancy Settle Murphy. Hi there, Nancy, with me on the Virtual Space Hero LinkedIn Live stage. Hi there.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for having me, Barbara.
Oh, Nancy, I am thanking you that you accepted my invitation to join again the Virtual Space Hero LinkedIn Live. I had a tremendous pleasure to talk with you about a month ago about virtual meetings. It was a super insightful conversation. And today we are going to focus on something super topical. We're talking about hybrid teams. Nancy, you have been in the field for many, many years. Let us know a little bit about your background in hybrid team development, hybrid organizational consulting.
Sure. Well, actually, hybrid, I think, used to be called virtual teams for the most part, because most of my clients for the last 20 years have been what I consider distributed or virtual teams, meaning at least some people were in some office location and some were completely remote or some were in satellite offices. So today, I think we've come to mean hybrid as for some going back to the office, since for many knowledge workers around the world, they've worked in an all virtual, completely distributed, entirely remote setting for the last 15 months.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think this is really one of the challenges that we are facing. But if you think about, so what are the differences about today's hybrid teams compared to a pre-COVID world? And Nancy, you know that I sometimes need to go off camera, and this is now one of the moments. But I'm listening to your exploration. I'm super interested.
Okay, thanks, Barbara. Thanks for letting me know. Well, gee, I think there are a lot of profound differences. One is that those people who used to work remotely before COVID and then suddenly had all their colleagues sitting around the virtual table with them with the same proximity to their manager, the same kinds of information flow as each other, they no longer felt at a disadvantage. Suddenly during COVID, everyone felt more equal. Now, with the advent of some organizations returning at least some people to a physical office, that imbalance might happen again. And I think it will be more acutely felt by remote workers who had a taste of feeling like they were operating equitably or at parity with others. Suddenly that balance might shift again. So I think that's one big difference. For people who never worked remotely before, they have had a taste of what I think of for many companies was the forbidden fruit, because many companies or managers up until COVID insisted certain work could not be done remotely. People had to be in the office. Well, now everyone realizes that wasn't quite true. And so for managers, they're going to have a harder time justifying why people must come to the office, especially if work was done very well during COVID. And then people who never had a chance to work remotely before now have become accustomed to it. And the majority of people in most surveys I've seen would like at least some time to be spent working remotely. The average seems to be two days a week in the office and 3 remotely. That's on average, and it depends what study you look at. But I think there are many
Absolutely.
differences as a result of COVID.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because there are a lot of studies out there already showing that people do not want to go back full time to the office. The majority of studies are showing that. And what we are seeing, and we just talked with Nancy about that a little bit before going live, that we do not see really a lot of organizations preparing for this hybrid setup. And we also know that hybrid can be more challenging compared to a completely virtual or completely in-presence organizational setting. So how has previous experience running a business virtually helped prepare leaders for this hybrid workplace? Wait, and there he is. He wants
And
to
there
say
he
hello
is.
to you, Nancy.
Hello, baby boy.
So how helps it preparing for this hybrid workplace?
Okay, great question. I'm going to take 2 kinds of leaders, one at a time. First, leaders who only led people face to face before COVID. So they had the steepest learning curve when people overnight had to start working virtually, especially if they hadn't had communication channels or processes or workflows defined that could be done virtually. So for many, it was what I think of as kind of a sink or swim situation. These leaders who had no experience working virtually had to come up with entirely new plans and structures and processes. And so the processes and so forth that they've learned, that they've come up with and implemented for an all virtual world, now their biggest challenge to me is needing to adapt some of them or modify some of those processes and communication channels for a world where some are in person and some are still remote. For leaders who are used
Let
to...
me interrupt you here. I'm sorry, Nancy. Could you maybe give us an example of what adaptation would that be if you think about one very concrete and specific example?
Sure. One example might be if I'm used to, if I'm a manager who was running meetings, let's say Zoom meetings for my staff before, and now some are going to be in the office and some are going to be remote. Now I have to think through, so how will I create parity? How will I hear all voices, encourage all contributions equally, regardless where someone is participating from? So, for example, I might say, gee, instead of having everyone who's in the office in a conference room and everyone who's remote come on Zoom, maybe we have everyone join via Zoom and no one in the conference room to create a truly level playing field. So that might just be one small example that comes to mind. It's how do I bring in the people who are remote and make them feel equal, as equal as I can, when they work in different locations.
Yeah, and I think this also brings us to a topic we discussed briefly before that. Even if we try to establish this feeling of equality, we always will have the challenge: what happens after the meeting? What happens with those who after the meeting go to the coffee machine, right, and continue discussing informally, while those who are online and cannot do so or join that conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some companies I've heard of and work with actually ask people to capture those conversations either by videotaping, or not videotaping, that's old-fashioned news, but video recording it and posting it, or saying, hey, we just came up with an epiphany, the 3 of us at the water cooler. I'm going to put this, let's say, in my Slack channel, or I'm going to send a group chat, or I'm going to send an email, whatever is the main source of communication between a particular team. And let's make sure that everyone who wasn't at that water cooler or in the hallway can access that. And that includes people who work in other parts of the building or on a different floor. And many times they're just as virtual or just as left out of those serendipitous conversations as people who work completely off site.
Absolutely. And these are the challenges. Do you remember we talked about this one study that we found where we saw that remote workers are the ones very often being overlooked in hybrid organizations when it came to promotions. So we have to think about how to include those who are working virtually in hybrid organizations. Do you have another example? What happens with what is a disadvantage if I'm the remote one and my colleagues are in the office, and how what can I do, for example, as a remote worker or remote part of an organization?
Sure. Well, let's stay on the topic of gaining visibility in hopes of career advancement or professional development. So I think people who work remotely, the onus is on us to be more proactive about, let's say, developing expertise in a certain area, maybe creating a blog, maybe asking my team leader or other team leaders if I can have time at their staff meeting to present about this topic that is of value to many people. So one is establish yourself as an expert. One might be volunteer for assignments that might be a stretch, that might be a little time consuming, but ultimately can gain you visibility and access to people outside of your immediate organization to build your influence, to build your credibility, and ultimately to hopefully get recognized and be given a more career enhancing assignment or even a new job.
I think that's so important for us virtual workers or being the virtual part of a hybrid team to be aware that proactivity and working on one's virtual visibility is super important, is highly important. If you think about senior leaders, and I know that you work a lot with C-level leaders, what do senior leaders need to pay attention to? They're determining and communicating policies regarding who works where and when. How does this idea of fairness come into play?
Well, that's a great question. And I'd say the majority of clients I work with and companies I've researched over the last even 2 or 3 months still haven't settled for sure what their work from home or remote work or hybrid work policy, whatever you want to call it, will be. I think first and foremost, whatever you decide about what your policy is, make sure you communicate it clearly with a business rationale, explaining what input you got, how you made your choices, so that even if some people aren't going to be thrilled with whatever the policy is, depending what it is their preference was, at least they can better accept it, maybe not completely accept it. And if they understand how you made your choices, they might be in a position to advocate for something different or to negotiate for something different. So first is communicate clearly what your rationale was and have rationale that's defensible.
Yeah. Can I ask you here a question? So, in your processes, the organizations that you accompany, how do they start? Do they start like a complete bottom up process on defining the sort of guidelines, or is it something that should start with some stretch from above? Is it some sort of top down, then bottom up, or is it bottom up, top down, or is it something totally different that I'm not even aware of?
That's another great question. And if you could see my hands, it's all across that spectrum. I've known some companies who are making decisions based on the size of their real estate investment and how many years their lease is and how expensive it was. So in some cases, it's all about justifying the real estate investment and then equipping the office and then deciding how many people need to be present to justify the investment. That's an extreme example. One might be, and I know many organizations are polling their employees, both for preferences, for job, what does the job require, what kind of interaction and collaboration is necessary, and whether that collaboration and interaction is better done face-to-face or can it reasonably be done well remotely. So that's another, is getting input, looking at the jobs. I'd say it's, for many forward-thinking companies, it's more about the purpose and process than it is about the physical location. So what is the job that needs to be done? And other questions, one is, how has the performance been over the last 15 months? If people have been productive and you have some measurable evidence in place, and that person or those people have been every bit as productive, if not more so, when working virtually, then do you have a reason to change it? I mean, that might make a case for keeping it the way it is. So, and just one more thing I wanted to say too is about building the social capital, building trusting relationships. It's a lot harder to do that remotely. It's possible, but especially when a number of new people have come in and you want to inculcate them into the organization, it's much more important, I think, to make sure you are intentional about how and when you bring people physically together.
Absolutely. And just at this point, I don't want to miss to point out that Nancy is running a tremendously important and interesting workshop next week. You can connect with Nancy here on LinkedIn, or you can look for her webpage, Guided Insight, but just ask her about the dates. Nancy, would you like just to give us a quick preview about the workshop next week? And I'm happy to be a participant of yours.
Yes, thanks, Barbara. Barbara is one of the first people to register. So the workshop is called Building a High-Performance Hybrid Team Culture Workshop. And it really focuses on the need to develop explicit shared operating principles or team norms that will govern how teams communicate and collaborate in this soon to be, or already is, hybrid world. So it's really a working session where people can come together and take and get some experience creating draft norms for their teams, for their hybrid teams. So it's a bit of kind of training and content, but it's a lot of working together and creating norms.
Fantastic. So check out Nancy's profile and check out the post she's sharing about this workshop that is happening next Tuesday, I think it is. Or is it Wednesday?
Yes.
Next Tuesday.
Tuesday
there it
from
is in my
9 to 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time.
Or 3 to 5 CET. So check it out and don't miss to sign up. And also check out Nancy's webpage. There's a lot of content there that she's sharing with us. And I'm really a huge fan of what you're publishing. So thanks so much for that. Nancy, we were already talking a little bit about what do we need to think about, to consider when it comes to equality and to fairness, from a leader's perspective, from a managerial perspective, but also what we can do as employees. So when it comes, and you were already mentioning the aspect of trust. So we know that trust is being built much more easily when we're in the same location. So when it comes to maintaining or building trust, preserving culture and values, and ensuring equity and fairness, what are some of the most important steps hybrid teams and their leaders can take right now, even if before people turn to the office? What are some tips that you would give us?
Great question. So first of all, just going back to principles for a minute, or team norms, I think a step organizations can take before they even start moving people back or finalize their decisions is to agree as a team at what point they need to collaborate and communicate. Are there certain hours of the day where everyone needs to be accessible and available? That's a big one for hybrid teams. How do we signal our presence when we're available? The lack of that can help build distrust among virtual teams. If I'm in the office and I can't reach you, you're at home, you're supposed to be working, I don't know where you are, that might give me some doubt about, are you really working or not? So I think the teams need to create some of those norms. I think with team leaders, they need to spend more time with their remote folks in intentional scheduled conversations than they do with their face-to-face colleagues. The reason being, if I'm face-to-face, I might have many casual conversations throughout the day, whereas for a remote worker, for me to check in with them, to share information, to give them tips about how to do X, Y, or Z better, I need to be really intentional. And generally, virtual team leaders often spend up to 20 to 25% more time communicating to people who are remote because they have to schedule it.
Oh, well, that is a tremendous number, 20 to 25% or whatever, but a bigger amount of time just investing in remote employees. So that's an important part, I believe, here. Thanks so much for sharing that. When it comes to celebrations, so we do know that celebrations for virtual teams are important, but they are also for in-presence teams. And I do know there is nothing more that at least my colleagues all over the world are talking about is when they can go back to the office and they have the first beer after the or wine, glass of wine or glass of water after the job, like the after work. So how do you combine this? How can you integrate virtual colleagues into these social activities if you're in a hybrid team?
So if the remote workers are in, let's say, within 30 to 40 miles or 20 or so kilometers away, I would strive to have face-to-face social interactions. So maybe either halfway or have the people who are remote come into a local restaurant, or in the summertime, we can have more things outside. So I'd say really strive for that, because I think the face-to-face, at least occasionally, is critical. And if you're going to use it for anything, use it to build relationships. So I think social gatherings are a great excuse to bring people together. If that isn't feasible, if remote workers are really too far away, then I think, let's say if you're going to have everyone in the office go out for lunch or a beer or after dinner, then give everyone who's remote, let's say, a gift certificate or something that will enable them to have some kind of a celebration. If they're people who work in smaller offices, let's say little pods of people in smaller locations, then they can have a small celebration or a celebration with a small number of people. I also like the idea of video recording what you're doing and the celebrations and what the sounds and sights are like. And because many times if you cross 12-hour time zones, it's not feasible to be celebrating at the same time. But if you can capture that for everyone to see, and then during a team meeting or prior to a team meeting, you can be able to see how your colleagues are celebrating.
And that's a very nice idea.
Then just one other thing is sending things. And something, when I say things, I don't mean via email. I don't mean a Slack post. I mean actually writing a card and saying thank you or congratulations, or here's a gift card, or here's a book I thought you'd like, or just something, sending something tangible, or a team cap with a team color or logo, something that is a physical reminder that they're part of the same team, even though they're not physically connected. I think that goes a long way.
Absolutely. And it's fun because at the beginning of the pandemic, we have not really seen that. And now if I just scroll through my LinkedIn newsfeed, I see so many new hires at certain organizations. For example, Miro is doing that a lot. And all the new Mironeers, the new employees from Miro, they hold up the package and they feel like being part of the community, even though they're all only between lines connected virtually. And it's fun what kind of emotions are attached to these packages. And another thing I remember that one of my colleagues, Markus Ebner, he is a positive leadership expert. What he's doing when he organizes the virtual trainings, I got a beautiful package from him, a carton with inside some chocolates, some fanfares, some stuff that you usually get when you're in an in-presence training. And he sends that out to all the participants of his trainings, sort of to make them feel welcome. And then you eat the same chocolate together when you're in the break, or you have something that connects the participants even virtually with emotions, right?
I love that. And then I would throw in a mug, something like that, so everyone can hold, whether it's a beer or coffee, depending on the time of day, or water, everyone can be joining with the same mug to give a toast.
Yeah, and it's fun because I think what he's adding, and that's a nice touch, he's doing positive leadership workshops. So I think there is one tea in German from one of those ecological brands that have like super different names, and it's about positive morning feelings or something like that. So he adds the tea bags to the present for the participants. It's really nice.
That's great. That's a really thoughtful gesture.
even connected to the topic. That's what I really like about it. Um, Let me ask you one question, because we were already talking about, we have these two different types of employees, the remote ones and also the in-present ones. Do you think that there are two different team cultures that might emerge among those who are remote and among those who are in the office? Or is it even possible to maintain one team culture for both teams, or both employee types, to say so?
Well, first, to answer your first question, I sure hope that there are not two very different cultures, whether that a team works on site versus remotely. To me, a team culture shouldn't be dependent on where someone works, but it's more on how we work together. So I would say a goal, of a really vital goal for a hybrid team would be to either create or sustain or maintain a consistent team culture, no matter where we happen to work from. And to me, it is more about the values that we live out, how we collaborate, how we respect each other, how we respond to requests, how we set priorities. That's, to me, what makes a team culture. So I would really hope that that would not be a different team culture for those who work one place or another.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. I also do hope so. I'm sometimes fearing that it's difficult to get to maintain one culture if you see like that groups are forming, and very often those are the ones that are virtually working and the other ones that are in person. But of course, it's an important part not to have that.
It is. I think, yes.
Absolutely. If you think about virtual team leaders, or hybrid team leaders, hybrid team leaders again, what would be one advice that you would give them? What is the single biggest piece of advice that you would give them for leading a hybrid team? Really not thinking about a virtual team, but about a hybrid team.
Well, I'd say if it's a new hybrid team versus one that has always been hybrid except for the last 15 months, can I give a couple pieces of advice, or do I have to?
Yeah, please. Oh, okay. Definitely. Right. We love that.
One is to ease people back gently. And that might be starting with a couple days a week for, let's say, 2 or 3 months. One of my daughters is working for a local company that is offering free lunch to everyone who comes into work, the physical site, on Wednesday. So that's their way of gently pulling people back in. So I think it isn't so much an on and off switch, or it shouldn't be. It should be more, let's dial people back in. Another huge issue that many of my clients, especially in the US, are wrestling with is, how do we make sure to keep people safe? How do we make sure people feel safe entering the workplace? For example, do we require proof of vaccine? Private employers can. It's legal. Do we want to do that? How do we assure that people, when they come in, are safe? Do we require masks or social distancing? Some people have immunocompromised family members they live with, or their kids aren't yet vaccinated. So I think, and there's no easy answers, but I think it's, how do I create a place where everyone who walks in and works in this office will feel physically safe? And so things are changing every day, but that's something that's tough. And then another,
maybe let me just add here something.
Sure.
And it's interesting because I think in Austria, this discussion wouldn't even be possible to say that you request a vaccine to come back to the office. I think that would be like almost impossible. But interestingly, I heard from a university colleague of mine, East Coast, United States, that they already said that they're going to open up the campus only for those who are vaccinated.
Yes, and yeah, private, like I said earlier, and this might change, but private employers are well within their rights to do that in an effort to keep everyone safe. So yeah, and then the question is, do you want to? What message are you sending if you require that? There's a big cultural divide in the U.S. about that. So you're probably gonna lose some, win some, all along the way.
Of course, yeah.
And then it's about, so once you get the basics, the safety issues addressed, the easing people back in. Then it's how do we make sure that those people who we once treated equally over the last 15 months, the people who either are newly remote or those who are staying remote, who have always worked remotely, how do we keep them in our mind's eye? How do we include them? How do we, you mentioned before about promotions, career advancements, how do we make sure they're assigned the best projects that are the most interesting and will launch their careers? How do we include them in conversation? So I think, to me, what I think about is designing for remote first instead of designing for face-to-face and just bringing in the remote people however they can be. It's a new paradigm, and it's about thinking, how do we design for a virtual workplace, and then how do we make sure that people who come to the office, that there's a purpose for them to come in. So, yeah, those are some of the issues I think they're facing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting because it really also has to do, if we think about remote first, we're going to be in a remote meeting, virtual meeting. And I'm seeing here one comment from Muhammad that is about camera on. So he's mentioning that Nancy had a different feeling while talking to you when your camera is on. Of course, human to human discussion can't be replaced by virtual discussion. But so, of course, it is critical that we are also able to establish a good and trustful connection when we are in the virtual space, and even when we're without camera. So I think that that also we know from research that being always on camera in all the meetings is something that challenges us a lot. So also maybe Nancy, what is your take on virtual meetings and being on off camera here?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, I think to require someone, if you're trying to establish eye contact, which is physically impossible because I'm either going to be looking at my camera or looking at you down here. So I have to make a choice. So making eye contact is really impossible. We can give the illusion of eye contact. In any case, it's very fatiguing. And to be staring at faces all day, trying to discern meaning, can really make our brains very tired, and our eyes. So I would say, and not much, but at least an MIT study from a couple of years ago showed that actually, if we're not looking at someone and we're just listening, literally closing our eyes, we can hear emotions much more deeply. We can sense the emotions through just the voice. So I would say, one practice I like is for, let's say, a team meeting, for the start, if you don't have kids running around or all sorts of distractions in the background, turn on your camera to say hello. And it doesn't matter if it's a bad hair day or not. I don't care if you're in a sweatshirt or not. But then think about when during the meeting, will it be useful and important to have video on? So it may not be the whole time. I think certainly for breakouts, I always want videos on during breakouts because it's very frustrating talking to a blank screen when it's just a couple of you. But I'd say be judicious about what, and that's another place where a norm is important. A team norm is, do we always require video on at the start of team meeting, or do we ever require it on? Or if we don't turn it on, are we obliged to explain why we don't have it on? There's no right or wrong. But I think as a team, if you don't have a norm about it, people who have their videos on may be assuming others are doing their email or just went to walk the dog. They don't know.
And I think what's interesting here is we are always coming back when we talk about virtual teams, when we talk about hybrid teams, it's all about the guidelines, the team norms, the organization norms. How do we want to live it, right? And I think this is probably one of the most important first steps when we talk about becoming a real hybrid team, is to think about the norms. You were talking about team norms, for example, such as having the camera on in meetings. What are other areas? We talked about communication also a lot at the beginning. What are other areas where you would suggest to talk about norms?
One is, I touched on earlier, is hours. What hours are we expected to all be there? So if it's a team that spans time zones, you might say from 10 a.m. Eastern U.S. time to 2 p.m. Eastern U.S. time, or whatever time zone you're in, we all need to be available for exchange, for responses to emails, for participation in Slack channel, for team meetings, for calls, etc. So are there certain kind of golden hours where everyone's expected to be present? I think that's an important one. One is scheduling time and sharing of calendars. It can be very frustrating when it requires multiple emails. If you have a way for people to schedule time, if your calendar is up to date, and by the way, include all national holidays on your shared team calendar, so you don't inadvertently book a really vital meeting on a day where two of your colleagues in another country have a bank holiday and can't participate.
Very good point. Very good point. Yeah, and I think with that, we are availability, communication channels, what are we using, and the topic of how do we want to work together in meetings are essential areas where we need those sort of agreements upon, right?
Absolutely. For meetings, just a couple others in addition to one that you named might be everyone comes fully prepared. And then you need to define what that means. So that means I've read our status reports before our team meetings, and the preparation we need to come prepared with is to share 2 highlights or 3 concerns or whatever it is, but do not use the meeting time to go over your status reports. That is a quick way to get everyone doing their email instead. So coming thoroughly prepared, or you don't participate in the conversation.
And I think this also brings us back to the importance of being clear on synchronous and asynchronous communication. When do we need what and why, and what are we going to do, for example, asynchronously before a meeting, and then what is happening asynchronous after a meeting. Fantastic advices. Nancy, amazing. So where can we learn more? I do know we already announced it next week, the 8th of June, there is a workshop going to happen. So connect with Nancy. And do you want to say a few words more about also your webpage and your other offers that you have out there?
Sure. Thanks, Barbara. On my website, which you can see right here on the screen, it's searchable by topic. I have probably literally hundreds of articles on the topic of virtual teamwork, collaboration, virtual learning, etc. So you can search by term, and then you can sign up for my communique. It's a free newsletter I send approximately once a month. No marketing, just articles that I hope people find useful. So you can sign up for that. And then I have a number of templates, examples, checklists, etc., that you can find there as well.
That is fantastic. And Nancy, I was just looking up again the article that I liked so much. It was one that you published on Wild Apricot about virtual meeting with templates and examples. It was a fantastic article that Nancy published. So connect with Nancy on LinkedIn, on whatever other channel, follow her, and go also through the webpage. Very valuable insights there. Nancy, it was a tremendous pleasure that you were back with me here on my virtual Space Hero stage. Thank you so much. And also thank you so much to going ahead when I needed to switch off the camera, and also for saying hello to my baby boy, of course, because this topic is clearly very interesting to him as well. Well, he's going to be in a hybrid workforce, correct?
He is. He's already started.
He's already started. That's it. And Nancy, I'm looking very much forward to seeing you next Tuesday in your workshop about leading high-performance hybrid teams. And with that, you know that I still have a virtual cocktail prepared for you backstage. I'm joining you in a minute there.
Okay, thank you. I'll see you then. Thanks, everyone.
It was fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us. Thanks also for sending me ahead of the show your questions. You know, you always can do that before I come up with the questions. Let me know what you're interested in, and I integrate those questions into our conversation here on the stage. Thanks a lot for being with us, and stay tuned. Next week, we're going to have our LinkedIn Live on Wednesday, and it's going to be about 101 meetings. And I have a colleague, Bruce Tulgan, here, who is an expert on how to run virtual 101 meetings. And with that, I'm saying thank you very much again. Thanks for joining. Thanks for being with us, and have a lovely morning, afternoon, or evening. Goodbye.